Hello guys, welcome to my new video, and today we're looking at Shadowlands best healers for Mythic Plus. And I know this is somewhat of a prediction video. This is a video based on the testing that I did, and if you're interested in seeing a similar ranking for Raid in terms of healer performance, let me know if you want to see a video like this in the comments below. And please like and subscribe the video if you enjoyed. These videos take me a decent time to make and edit, so if you like the content, please do subscribe. It's really appreciated. I have to mention a big disclaimer before anyone's going to watch this video. It is beta, anything can happen, especially about the covenants. I'll be talking about some of the covenants that I found very interesting for healers, and again, I'll be talking about the ones that are strong, but generally speaking, covenants have been pretty volatile in terms of one being the best one week and that same covenant being the worst next week. So keep that in mind. So first of all, before we're going into the video, we have to mention that it is Season 1 Prideful affix, and Prideful is something similar to Reaping, but on a single mob, and it happens basically every 20% of the trash, and you get this mob that does a ton of AoE damage. So all of a sudden, having a cooldown or having a healer that can provide burst healing is very important, and it is relatively long. Again, it depends on your DPS and things like that, but definitely AoE healing or AoE healing bursting capabilities are quite important in Shadowlands on Season 1. So first of all, let's go to the healer that I feel is the most powerful, strong, retaining its strength, and that is Restoration Druid. Resto Druid for the longest time have been very strong in BFA. Did I mention that engineering battle res is going to be removed in Shadowlands? So all of a sudden, the only healer that can provide battle res is Resto Druid. Again, keep in mind that Warlocks and DKs are still looking quite strong, so maybe you won't need a healer with a battle res, but it always helps to have a backup. The fact that there is very little changes to Druid in Shadowlands makes sense to put them in the top because they've been so strong in BFA. Look at the mastery. The whole concept of Resto Druid mastery fits so well in smaller groups where you can stack those hots and your healing is going to be really strong, and you can kind of see the results when you deal with prideful mobs because the healing is really strong. So Resto Druid mastery is still there. It's still extremely strong. You can look at the covenant abilities. Convoke the spirits from Nightfey is still looking like the main option, but keep in mind, he has been nerfed a couple of times, so maybe the Blizzard is going to rebalance it again. In terms of the healing that they provide, they're non-cooldown dependent healers. Unlike something like a Holy Paladin who has to really make sure not to waste their wings or Avenging Wrath, Resto Druid can, to some extent, provide good healing no matter what, which makes it very strong for things like Prideful, like I mentioned. In terms of legendaries, they have a lot of legendaries that can provide good healing, especially the double life bloom one, and they have legendaries that can provide DPS if you feel like you don't need the healing. On top of that, you have utility like Stampeding Roar. You have possibility of Soul of the Forest making a comeback, which is going to create a more engaging playstyle, especially in raids. Again, Soul of the Forest is used in BFA, but mainly for the versatility build, so keep that in mind. There has been certain AoE cap to Resto Druid in terms of Feral Affinity. Druid Kitty Swipe now has a cap, and whether Druid or Feral Affinity is going to make a comeback or Balance Affinity is going to be better is still up to debate, but keep that in mind. And you also have a new talent, Heart of the Wild, which kind of gives you a burst DPS option if you need it. So if you look at that, there is very few reasons not to put Resto Druid as one of the top healers in Shadowlands in terms of Mythic Plus content. The second healer that I'm going to be placing here is going to be Discipline Priest, and I've had so much fun with Discipline. In my eyes, Discipline is probably one of the most fun healers in Shadowlands because of the additional buttons that were meaningful, unlike many other healers. For example, I think there is a possibility of having things like Mind Blast and Shadow World Death being part of your rotation, with Shadow World Death legendary, which could make the rotation a lot more meaningful. Maybe Shadow Covenant is gonna make a comeback because Shadow Covenant has been redesigned, and all of a sudden you have to make sure that you're going to optimize your Shadow spells because you can only cast Shadow spells during that cooldown. So all of a sudden you have a far more meaningful rotation that can accommodate different damage patterns. You have to mention that Discipline Priest can still have single target healing problems, but they have a lot more utility because Blizzard changed affixes in all our ways. So first of all, bursting has been changed. Your Mass Dispel can dispel bursting. Grievous has been changed in a lot of ways. So all of a sudden, Discipline Priest has less weaknesses that they had in BFA. And on top of that, you have abilities coming back like Mind Suit, which situationally could be insanely powerful, giving you crazy skips as a group. You also have things like Rapture, which is very strong right now. Keep in mind that Spirit Shell is not really properly tuned in my eyes, so I'm not sure if Spirit Shell is going to be used, but Rapture is a very strong cooldown, and there are certain legendaries that buff it as well, and conduits as well. So keep in mind that, again, you have a cooldown to use when you do approach Prideful. There's also a stamina buff, but I have to mention that, again, stamina buff scrolls are not available in Shadowlands, but a lot of the affixes still scale off players' HP, so it might still have some diminishing value. But in terms of Covenants, Ventir, Mind Games, and Kyrian, Boon of the Ascendant is looking very strong for Discipline Priest. Keep in mind that for Holy Priest, the Kyrian Boon of the Ascendant is looking like a decent option as well. So if you're looking to play both of the specs, you might be making a choice based on what's decent for both of them. So keep that in mind. I have to say Discipline Priest is looking like a solid option with a possibility. And again, I'm kind of scared about this. It happened in Uldir BFA when Discipline Priest got nerfed in raids and infected them a lot in Mythic Plus. I hope that's not going to happen in Shadowlands, because I think Discipline Priests are looking in a very decent position right now for all content. I've thought about this a lot, and I'm still not 100% sure on this, but I'm going to be placing Holy Paladin here, because Holy Paladin is still, to some extent, it has received the most changes out of all the healers in Shadowlands, but the playstyle is still somewhat similar. There's still melee healer, they still have to hit the mobs from close up, there's still cooldown dependent on things like Avenging Wrath or Wings, which have a 2-minute cooldown. You don't have Ineffable Truth like you had in BFA 8.3. Again, Ineffable Truth, there is a Covenant that kind of gives you a certain version of that, but generally speaking, cooldown dependency, we're back to cooldown dependencies, Holy Paladin. You need to make sure you use your cooldowns at the right positions, maybe save them for things like Prideful. Now, keep in mind that I feel like Holy Paladin is really dependent on a Covenant choice right now, to some extent more than other healers, because Covenant Divine Toll that is provided by Kyrian is very, very strong right now. It's 1-minute cooldown, it shoots out 5 Holy Shocks, the AoE healing insane. It's going to either shoot out Holy Shocks on friendly targets, on enemy targets, so it can give you burst DPS potential or burst AoE healing potential, which also is going to give you 5 Holy Power, which then you can weave into things like World of Glory if you need single target, or Light of Dawn if you need AoE healing, and all of a sudden it synergizes with things like Glimmer of Light. A lot of the Holy Paladin power is coming from this one Covenant ability, 1-minute cooldown, and if you wasted your wings, if you have nothing left and there's a big AoE damage happening, you always will have this, or at least you might have your Divine Toll to save the day. At the end of the day, Holy Paladin still feels like a healer that provides one of the most DPS alongside with Discipline Priest, because Discipline Priest always has to deal damage. If you optimize your healing cooldowns as a Holy Paladin, you can do a lot of healing, and also you can provide a lot of DPS. So if your group needs that big healer DPS, Holy Paladin could be a very viable option, a very strong option. But again, like I mentioned, it's not like a Resto Druid that has constantly good healing. Holy Paladin has to make sure to optimize their cooldowns in a lot of different ways. Plus they have a weird infusion of light change that, again, I'm not sure if it's going to be reverted or not, so keep that in mind. Now let's move on to number 4, and that is going to be Mistweaver Monk. I have kinda thought about putting this a little bit higher, because I feel Mistweaver Monk is very underappreciated healer right now, because there's so many changes that are still happening to Mistweaver. So keep your ear to the ground in terms of Mistweaver. There has been a lot of things changing. Mistweaver to some extent still has a ton of bugs, but the latest changes to Chi or Way of the Crane makes it that Way of the Crane or the Chi Red Crane talent does not require you to have 20 mobs in order to do insane amount of healing. You can do a crazy amount of healing with just one mob available, where you can be using your DPS abilities, then using your instant cast Enveloping Mist that are going to splash heal. And all of a sudden your 2-minute cooldown, Chi becomes one of the strongest healing cooldowns when combined with a legendary things like Extend Life, which has direct synergy with Enveloping Mist. A lot of people have overlooked Mistweaver burst healing potential through this combo because it was very recent. And on top of that, you also have the fact that Mistweavers provide 5% physical buff. They have AoE Stun, Way the Crane or Chi, like I mentioned before, lasts for 25 seconds, which is quite a lot. And in terms of current abilities, again, a lot of stuff is broken, but the Necro Lord Bone Dust Brew is still looking a very strong option. Again, it is relatively buggy. Some people have looked into the Kyrian ability, which has been nerfed severely before, but maybe the Chi changes are going to make Kyrian a little bit more interesting or a little bit more viable. But at the end of the day, Bone Dust Brew is still looking quite strong. So again, in my eyes, an underdog healer, Mistweaver Monk still has one of the best single target heals, has a strong cooldown. Their DPS is relatively low out of all the healers, so Mistweaver DPS feels very weak, but I feel their burst healing and their utility could carry them to a decent spot in Mythic Plus environment. Now let's go to the bottom list of the healers in Mythic Plus, and I have to mention Resto Shaman here. Again, Resto Shaman in terms of changes, they didn't get a whole lot of changes that are really going to impact their Mythic Plus or dungeon performance in Shadowlands. At the end of the day, they got Earth Shield as baseline, which is, again, they need a tank cooldown, and they got Earth Shield, which is relatively interesting, or it's needed, but I kind of would wanted a stronger tank cooldown being available. But Blizzard for some reason just decided to implement Surge of Earth, which is a weird talent that sprouts from Earth Shield but does AoE healing, which doesn't really make sense. Resto Shaman at the end of the day to me feels like a raid healer that has just been brought into Mythic Plus, and Blizzard is like, hey, just deal with it type of deal. So I'm not sure how many Resto Shamans are going to be pushing really high keys. I hope there is going to be more, because again, Prideful is going to be AoE healing affix. Resto Shamans can do a lot of AoE healing, but people need to be stacked. So maybe in poke scenarios, missing out on a couple of chain heal jumps could be really annoying if someone's really far ahead. But I have to mention, Resto Shaman still has a lot of utility. You still are the only healer in the game that has an interrupt. You do have AoE stuns. To some extent, I'm still relatively sad for Resto Shaman's missing out of Igneous potential, because I really enjoyed having a niche as Resto Shaman for strong single target DPS potential, true flame shock into lava bursts, getting lava surges and getting instant lava bursts, and it felt really nice. But the DPS of Resto Shaman in Shadowlands doesn't feel all that great. For me personally, I feel if you're going to push really high content as a Resto Shaman, you're probably going to do raiding instead of Mythic Plus. But I hope things are going to change. I really want a tank cooldown for Resto Shamans. And in terms of some of the Covenant abilities, a lot of the Covenant abilities are actually relatively decent for Resto Shaman. For my favorite Covenant abilities in terms of gameplay, I really enjoyed Kyrian, Vesper Totem. I really kind of like this. And maybe for raids, Primordial Wave felt pretty interesting, but that's purely out of the gameplay options. So it is interesting to see Resto Shaman Covenants being relatively balanced. And now we're going to the last heal, and that is going to be, again, for another expansion in my eyes, Holy Priest. Holy Priest felt at the start when they introduced a ton of new damaging abilities to Holy Priest, I was excited. I thought there's going to be, or at least Blizzard might build on top of the DPS abilities to make it more engaging, more interesting to use. And once they introduced the new legendary Cauterizing Shadows, where if the Shadow World Pain drops off or a mob dies, it heals people around, and I was like, interesting. Maybe Holy Priest is going to have an incentive to deal damage in order to heal other members, but that got a nerf, and all of a sudden a lot of the damaging abilities that Blizzard introduced to Holy Priest, like Mind Seer and Mind Blast, got removed. So now you have a healer that has few extra DPS abilities, but again, feels a bit like Resto Shaman, where it is suited far more in raid environments than Mythic Plus. At the end of the day, you still have to make a hard choice as a Holy Priest. Do I deal damage or do I heal? And their HPS is going to be based on the balancing, which again is not finished yet because Blizzard is still doing balancing changes. It feels like in Shadowlands you might be even more scrutinized for playing Holy Priest. In BFA, if you play Holy Priest, some people might be like, why aren't you playing Discipline? In Shadowlands, I feel there's going to be even more of this kind of attitude towards Holy Priest when you compare it to Discipline, because Discipline is looking like an extremely strong contender both for Mythic Plus and raids, and some people, if you're doing high-end content, some people might even force you to play it, which I don't like. I wish Holy would have a stronger niche in both of the contents. If you look at Priest in general, I feel Priest is a very relatively rounded off class, because you have a high skill ceiling spec like this one in Priest, and you have a relatively easygoing healer like Holy Priest for times when you feel like you don't want to, you know, be overwhelmed with boss abilities or mob abilities or whatever, and you want to have a relatively easy reactive healer. Holy Priest can be a very good option. So I feel Priest in general is a decent class for healers in Shadowlands. And this has been my ranking for Mythic Plus in terms of healers. Again, disclaimer, anything can change. There's still a long time before Shadowlands. In terms of the ranking, I definitely feel the Mistweavers can be viewed as somewhat underdog healers, because I still feel they could have a lot of niche potential in Mythic Plus if played correctly, if their scaling is going to be pretty decent. In terms of Holy Paladins, it feels like they have this similar niche that they had in BFA, where if you can sacrifice some of the healing in order to provide more DPS, they can do that in terms of offensive Holy Shocks, offensive Divine Tolls and things like that. And at the end of the day, like I mentioned, Resto Druid just feels like it's meant to be a Mythic Plus healer. To some extent that, in my eyes, Resto Shaman was probably meant to be a raid healer, but I love to hear your opinions on this. I love to hear your opinions in terms of the ranking. If you enjoy the content, please do subscribe. A lot of things can change, and sometimes it's not as clear as 1, 2, 3. Let me know how you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next